Hello everyone, Honor here, back with another build guide, this time for Voidwalker Warlock. Now this build is going to be a PvE oriented endgame build that can take on a wide variety of content from just your regular patrol and strikes, all the way up to difficult endgame content like the 980 power level Nightfall and the dungeon. Now before we get into the build, I wasn't sure originally if I actually wanted to make a video guide for this build because this build is already very popular. I've seen it mentioned often on Reddit. I've seen it showcased by almost every single high-profile Destiny 2 streamer and YouTuber, and many of you are already actually probably utilizing pieces of this build. However, Destiny 2 has seen such a big influx of returning and new players with new light and Shadowkeep that I ultimately decided that an in-depth build guide that explains all the bits and pieces of how this build works is still something that people might want. And, in addition, I also have a few extra things that I haven't really seen people talk about. So hopefully, even if you're a veteran player or if you're using this build already, you can still pick up some new useful information. Now as for the build itself, I might be biased as a Warlock main, but this build seems to me the most strongest PvE build in the game right now. It's amazing in both solo and team play. It brings utility and incredibly high DPS to the table. Personally, I've used it to great success when I'm farming the master level Nightfalls. I use it in the Garden of Salvation raid, and most recently I used it to get my solo flawless of the newest dungeon, Pit of Heresy. And so in this guide, we're going to be going over the armor components and mods. We're going to be talking about recommended weapon choices to complement the build, and we're going to be breaking down the moment-to-moment gameplay. Now with this build in particular, it's going to revolve around our grenade ability in the Season of Undying artifact mod, Oppressive Darkness. And so each one of these grenades that we throw is going to apply a serious debuff and also do massive damage all on its own, which is going to allow you to clear large groups of enemies or melt down high priority targets at will. And so we'll be using a combination of exotic armor and mods to regenerate this grenade as fast as possible. So this build in particular is unique in that it has options when it comes to the exotic armor that you could be using. And each of these options, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons, and each has its own kind of style of play that it excels at. And so let's break down what each of these exotics do and how they work. So first on the table is Nezarec Sin, and this is the exotic helmet from the base game of Destiny 2 that I see most often recommended for this build on Reddit and YouTube and Twitch. And so its exotic perk is called Abyssal Extractors. This is a 20-second buff triggered by any kill with any void damage. So that's going to be a weapon kill, a grenade kill, melee ability kill, super kill. Any source of void damage will trigger this buff for 20 seconds. During that 20-second window, your ability energy recharge rate will be increased. So that's going to be your grenade ability, your melee ability, your class ability, and your super ability will all get increased recharge rate. And so while this 20-second buff is active, any additional void damage kill will refresh the timer back to 20 seconds. And this buff in particular gives a 3 times faster ability recharge. And this exotic can be found just as a random world drop, or if you're lucky, you can buy it from Xur on the weekends if he's selling it. Now, when I tested this helmet out on my Warlock with my current setup, if I keep the buff up constantly, it will lower my grenade cooldown from 59 seconds down to about 20 seconds, and it lowers my super cooldown from about 4.5 minutes to about 1.5 minutes, which is not too bad. Now, the next exotic on the table that we're considering is Convoverse Hold. And so these exotic arms are from the Forsaken expansion, and these actually are my personal go-to for this build. So the exotic perk is called Chaotic Exchanger. It gives you damage resistance while you're charging a grenade, and it gives you a random amount of grenade energy back when your grenade hits an enemy. So this random amount of energy can range from as low as 20% of your grenade ability to as high as the entire grenade. And so this exotic is also one that you could find as a random world drop or from Xur on the weekends if he's selling it. Now, some of you might be turned off by the fact that the refund amount on this exotic is random. But the perk can proc more than once from additional enemies walking into the grenade, and it can actually also perk more than once on a single target. So the way that this perk seems to function is that there's a small 1 to 2 second cooldown on the trigger for your grenade ability recharge, meaning that it's possible for an overcharged grenade to first return grenade energy right when it hits, and then if the target is still standing in the grenade, it'll tick again about 1 to 2 seconds later. So you can actually really often get your full grenade back on an enemy if they're a big, high health enemy that stands in your grenade for the entire duration. And so at the end of the day, I've found that this perk is actually incredibly consistent. And in combination with some of the mods from the seasonal artifact that we'll be talking about later, you can practically guarantee a constant flow of supercharged grenades. And so one of the other components of this exotic that I feel is kind of overlooked, at least in PvE, is the damage resistance that you get while you're charging a grenade. If you're running difficult or high level content, this perk is incredible. Having the ability to charge a grenade for damage resistance when you're critical health or when you're going for a risky revive is very useful, especially because you can sprint to cancel the charge so you're not wasting your grenade. So you basically have an on-demand damage resistance that you can just pull out whenever you need it. And once you get used to this perk, it's really hard to go back to using other exotics. Now the last exotic I want to talk about is Verities Brow, and some of you may have never even seen this before, so you may not remember this, but this exotic is all the way back from the Warmind expansion. It used to be a reward given for completing the campaign at the time, but I think most players considered it garbage, so nobody really used it. But I believe now with the release of New Light, it's no longer a campaign reward. You have to get it as a random world drop or from Xur on the weekends if he's selling it. Now what does this exotic do? It has a perk called the Fourth Magic, which gives you a buff called Death Throws on on any energy weapon kill. And so this buff will boost the grenade recharge rate for both you and any of your nearby allies. So this buff stacks up to 3 times. It'll last for 15 seconds if the buff is affecting one other person besides you, or otherwise it'll only last about 10 seconds if you're by yourself. And I've actually seen, I think that if you affect up to 3 people with it, I've seen the buff push past 15 seconds, so I'm not exactly sure how that trigger works. But an important thing to know is that additional kills while the buff is active do not increase or refresh the duration of the buff, like Nezarec Sin. It only increases the stacks. So if you already got the stacks up to 3 times, getting additional energy weapon kills will not refresh the timer. The timer will still tick down. The only way that energy weapon kills affect this is just by increasing your buff stacks from 1 times to 2 times to 3 times. And so the grenade recharge rate when you're using this exotic at a 3 times buff is the same as Abyssal Extractors from Nezarec Sin. So it's a 3 times ability regen rate. Now the biggest benefit provided by this exotic in particular is its ability to also boost your allies' grenade recharge, just as effectively as it boosts yours. And in a team environment, that's actually really good. If you're running with other classes that don't have grenade boosting exotics, like some Titans or some Hunters may not be running exotics that allow them to boost their grenade recharge, but they might also be using Void with Oppressive Darkness. You can be the team player to wear this helmet and boost all of your grenade recharge, and in my experience, your entire team will have grenades on about 20-second cooldowns, which is amazing. Now, if you've followed along with any of my previous guides or played around this build, you are probably familiar with the mods we're about to talk about from the seasonal artifact. You probably already have them slotted in. But if you're new to the build, let's talk about what each of these pieces do. So the first piece is Oppressive Darkness. This is the centerpiece of the build. This is a class item perk from the 5th and final column of the Season of Undying artifact. It reads, causing damage with a Void Grenade adds a weaken effect to enemies. This is a debuff that is going to apply to any enemy that's damaged by your Void Grenade. It lasts for 5 seconds and causes them to take an additional 30% damage from all sources, including the grenade itself. And because it's based on causing damage, this debuff can last the entire duration of the grenade, plus another 5 seconds past if the enemy stays within the damage of the radius of your grenade the entire time. This is a 6 cost mod that can be slotted on any polarity, because it's from the seasonal artifact, and a very important part of the build. The other perk we're going to talk about is Enhanced Ashes to Assets. This is a class item perk that reads, gain even more super energy on grenade kills. It's a 4 cost mod that goes on your class item, and it only goes on class items with a solar polarity. Now as for how to get this mod, I got it as a random drop from a 950 power level Nightfall. I believe you can also get it from the 980 power level Nightfall, and I've heard reports that people have been getting it from the 920 match made power level Nightfall, so you may want to grind that out. Now every single grenade kill you get with this perk equipped will get you a big chunk of your super. It looks about 10% of your super per grenade kill. And since we're going to be throwing high damage debuffing grenades as often as we can, this is a very synergistic perk that will accelerate us towards being able to throw more Nova Bomb supers as well. The last couple perks we're going to talk about are Breach Refractor and Anti-Barrier rounds. These combo very nicely together. These are perks from the Season of Undying artifact. And Breach Refractor will grant you grenade energy on final blows with shield-piercing weapons or when a member of your fire team shuts down a barrier champion's ability. It costs 3 energy to apply and can be applied to any chest piece regardless of elemental polarity. Anti-barrier rounds pair with this Breach Refractor perk. They are a mod that you can apply to either auto rifles, SMGs, or hand cannons, allowing you to shoot through shields, shut down those barrier champions, and giving you grenade energy when you're killing things if you have Breach Refractor also equipped. And with these two mods together, from an empty grenade charge, 11 kills will get you your grenade back. And if you're using this on a weapon with the Demolitionist perk on it, you can actually get your grenade back in as little as 6 kills from empty. So now that we've talked about the perks and the exotic armor choices we can consider in this build, let's talk about weapons that might complement our picks. And so depending on which of the exotics you're going to use, you might have certain loadout restrictions. And I'm going to talk about the big pros and cons for each of these exotics and what weapons or loadouts I think fit best with each one. So let's talk about Nezarec Sin first, because like I mentioned, this is the most popular recommendation I see on YouTube videos, on Reddit, on streams, and personally, I really think this is the most overrated exotic out of the three. And I think a lot of its popularity has to do with the popularity of the Recluse SMG. Now, Nezarec Sin, its biggest pro is that it gives you very fast super regeneration in addition to ability regeneration. So if my priority was throwing as many Nova Bombs as possible, this is the choice that I would go with, because that's really the only advantage that Nezarec Sin offers over the other two exotics. If you really want to be tossing out as many Nova Bombs as possible, then this is the exotic to go for. I will say, however, that if you're choosing to use Bottom Tree Void Warlock with the Devour perk that gives you your grenade energy back based on kills with the Devour perk, Nezarec Sin can pair really nicely with that one. Now, because you'll be needing void damage weapons to trigger Abyssal Extractors, the following weapons are what I recommend to go with. Now, the first and most obvious choice is probably the Recluse, and this gun is probably the most overpowered legendary weapon that Bungie has released in Destiny 2. It's an obvious choice to pair with Nezarec Sin. It's a legendary SMG. It's got a damage perk called Master of Arms that basically turns the body shot damage from this SMG into the same amount of damage that you would get from hitting precision shots. This Master of Arms perk procs from kills with any weapon, so if you get a kill with your special weapon or your heavy weapon and swap to Recluse, Recluse has this damage perk active. And that just makes mowing down waves of adds just incredibly easy. This weapon is a reward from a short PvP quest that you can pick up from Shacks of the Tower. All it requires is a certain number of wins in PvP and for you to reach 2100 glory in the survival playlist. Now, if you're looking for a longer range option, there are situations in Destiny 2 where Recluse is just too short range. Graviton Lance is a great choice to go with. This is an exotic pulse rifle. It has a perk called Cosmology that makes it so that enemies killed with this gun will turn into tracking void projectiles that'll attack other nearby enemies. So this weapon is just a great choice for long range ad clear. Now, if you're already using either Recluse or Graviton Lance as your primary weapon, there's really not a reason to also be using a Void Heavy weapon, unless you're also taking advantage of Taken or Fallen or Hive armaments mods. And so those mods will grant you heavy ammo when you get kills with the corresponding enemies with a grenade. And so what you can do is you be using a Void Heavy weapon, you use the Void Heavy weapon to recharge your grenade, you throw your grenade to get more heavy ammo, and you keep repeating that way. So if you're going to be doing that, then I can recommend two of the following weapons. Now, the first one is going to be Hammerhead. This is a 450 RPM machine gun from the Black Armory expansion, and this is actually a fairly easily grindable weapon. All you have to do is pick up weapon frames from Ada in the tower, and then you can complete the requirements and do a forge and get this gun to drop and do that over and over and over again until you get the roll that you want. This weapon actually recently got nerfed, but still has insane, almost scout rifle-like range and great stability. And so the role that you want to look for with this gun is Feeding Frenzy and either Surrounded or Rampage. The other option that you could consider is the machine gun from the current season pass, Temporal Claws. This is a 900 RPM machine gun, and according to Bungie, this weapon will soon be grindable from the Vex offensive activity in the next hotfix update, which is scheduled for November 7th. It's supposed to be a random drop from the end of that activity, so you may be able to grind it out there. Now, similar to Hammerhead, this gun can also roll with either Rampage or Surrounded as its damage increasing perks, but it can't really roll with any reload speed increasing perks. So I think the next strongest option to look for is Autoloading Holster. This gun already has a big mag size. I believe the default mag size is somewhere around 80 or 90 bullets, so that's actually really big for a machine gun. And you can just mow down a bunch of enemies, put it away, wait for Autoloading Holster to proc after a couple seconds, and then pull it out again and continue. So those are the weapons that I recommend to be paired with Nezarec Sin. Now, let's move on to Convoverse Hold. Like I mentioned in the build section, this exotic is my personal favorite out of the three. Like I mentioned before, the damage mitigation perk alone, I think, makes this a top tier pick, especially if you know you're going to be doing difficult content. And unlike the other two exotics, Convoverse Hold is not tied to kills with any particular weapon or any particular kind of damage source. It allows you to be fully flexible with your loadout. And this is great for, especially great for some of the harder tier content where they have the match game modifier or you have the champions, and that's going to force you into running certain weapons to account for elemental shields and for the kind of champions you're going to be running against. So if there's anti-barrier, if there's barrier champions, if there's overload champions, it means I can run Ariana's Vow, it means I can run Divinity to help shut those champions down and make it easier on my team to kill them instead of having to be locked into using the Recluse, which you have to put an anti-barrier mod on if you're going to be using that in that kind of content, or Graviton Lance, which can't even take an anti-barrier mod. And so another big advantage that this exotic offers over the other two is that there's no downtime often between grenades. You know, even with Nezarec Sin getting the perk procced really quickly, the best you're going to get is you're going to get maybe a 10-second grenade cooldown, but you still have to wait that 10 seconds for your grenade to recharge. With Convoverse Hold, it gives you that grenade ability energy right away. So if you get a good proc off the perk, your grenade will fill right back up and you can spam a grenade back to back to back. And like I mentioned before, the perk can proc twice. You can proc multiple times on multiple enemies walking into your grenade. You can proc twice on the same enemy. And so in my experience, this exotic has been very consistent in granting my grenade whenever I need it. If there's multiple big health targets that I want to be hitting with grenades, Convoverse Hold can allow me to do that right away instead of having to wait for the ability recharge. Now, I also like to run a primary weapon with Demolitionist on it so that even if I get the worst RNG with Convoverse and I only get that 20% refund, you know, I could easily make up for it with the combo of Demolitionist, anti-barrier rounds, and Breach Refractor, and it'll only take about 4 kills for me to get my grenade back. So if you're the kind of person who you know you're going to be targeting that endgame content, or you enjoy running a wide variety of weapons, I think this is definitely the exotic choice for you. Now lastly on the table, let's talk about Veritys Brow again. Because although Convoverse Hold might be my go-to when I'm running solo content, Veritys Brow is really fast becoming my favorite for group activities. When I'm running the Nightfall with my clanmates, and we are all running Void classes with Oppressive Darkness, it really makes a difference when everyone is able to throw about a bunch of grenades as often as they can. And so this big boost to everyone's grenade recharge allows you to tear through waves of enemies very quickly. It allows you to burst down those high-value targets because nobody is going to be waiting on a grenade recharge. As soon as we see them, someone always has it up. And so that's why I think this exotic armor piece is actually a great choice to go for if you're going to be running with a team, especially if you're going to be running with a team that's also using Void Grenades, also using Oppressive Darkness. And so, because it's based on energy weapon kills, you know, you might be tempted to run your favorite legendary energy primary, your Recluse, your whatever. But there's one weapon in particular that I want to mention that I think people should consider, and that's the Loaded Question. And so this is a Pinnacle Fusion Rifle that was added in the Black Armory expansion. You get it from a kind of long quest from Zavala that has you do a bunch of strikes. It's got a special perk called Reservoir Burst, which will cause this fusion rifle to do extra damage and make enemies explode when the mag is full. And so then it also has auto-loading holster, which allows you to put the weapon away, let it reload itself, and then you can pull it out to explode enemies again. And so since the buff from Verities Brow doesn't refresh its timer on additional kills while the buff is up, so you can only refresh this buff every 15 seconds when it runs out, you can actually use this fusion rifle. So you'll just pull it out, get an easy triple kill, stack that buff up to 3 times, and then put it away for 15 seconds. Keep getting kills with your primary, getting kills with your heavy weapon, and then when the buff runs out again, you pull out loaded question, you explode another 3 enemies, and you get your buff stacked up to 3 times again. So that's why I think this is a good choice if you want to be running a kinetic primary instead of an energy primary. I think loaded question is a great choice to go with. And even outside of this build, this gun is still one of the best ad clearing legendary weapons in the game. So if you don't have it, I highly recommend picking it up. Alright, now that we've gone over the exotic choices, and I've talked about the pros and cons of each one in terms of solo and team play and what your priorities are, let's talk about some of the elements of the gameplay. So what tree of the Voidwalker Warlock subclass should you be using? Now this build is obviously going to synergize the best with top tree Void Warlock. So in top tree Void Warlock, if you hold your grenade button down, it's going to overcharge your grenade, which is going to make your grenade do more damage, have a wider area effect, and you'll have access with top tree to the higher damage version of Nova Bomb. It's going to travel slower, but it'll also explode and release tracking Axion darts when it detonates that also do a significant amount of damage themselves. And so this is basically the explosion, high damage Warlock tree, and this pairs very nicely with how high damage this build is, and when you can overcharge those grenades and deal high damage and debuffs with them, and you're recharging them so quickly, this is really the tree that you want to go for. And this is where you're really going to feel like a space wizard. You're going to be disintegrating enemies left and right with your powerful grenades, and then following up with a quick Nova Bomb charge to just blow things out of their plane of existence. And, because you're going to have the ability to recharge your grenades so quickly, you can use your grenades as you like. You can use them to clear out groups of ads. You can use them to debuff high priority targets, bosses, mini bosses, whatever, and then unload with your heavy weapons or your super. You will just be getting so many grenades, and clearing enemies and killing bosses is going to be so much easier with this top tree build. And one other thing to know about this subclass is that your melee ability, Entropic Pull, gives you a significant chunk of your grenade energy back when you punch something, and it doesn't require a kill. Most Warlock melee abilities require you to kill to get whatever extra perk is attached to them. Entropic Pull does not. You can punch an enemy, they'll glow purple for a little bit, and you'll get about 60 to 70% of your grenade energy back just from that. You don't have to get a kill with this melee ability. So let's say you're running Convoverse Hold, you get an unlucky proc, you are, you can't get any, you're not running Demolitionist, or you're not running Anti-Barrier or Breach Refractor for some reason, you can still get a punch off on something if you have a charged melee, and get the rest of that grenade energy back to be able to resume throwing grenades as much as you can. Now, bottom tree Void Warlock is still a viable option if your priority is survivability. So with bottom tree, holding your grenade button down will consume the grenade, giving you the Devour buff, and the Devour buff will heal you to full health with every kill that you get. And so, although your damage will not be as high as top tree, this is still a respectable option. You can dish out a lot of damage with the high quantity of grenades you'll be throwing, because Devour also recharges your grenade energy on kills. So if you're comboing that with Convoverse Hold, or with Nezarec Sin, or with Verities Brow, you're going to be getting grenades back very quickly. And so, you'll basically be unkillable as long as you have that Devour buff, and you'll be able to throw as many grenades as you like. So bottom tree Void Warlock is still a viable option, just not quite as high damage as the top tree. Now middle tree Warlock. Middle tree Warlock is, can technically function with the build, but it's not really a consideration. The charge grenade that this tree gets is not that useful in PvE. It's just a short-range little shotgun blast. It doesn't do that much damage in PvE, even with the weaken ability. And the super was severely nerfed back in Forsaken due to PvP complaints. So this is not a tree that I would recommend using in this build at all in PvE. Now let's talk about what kind of grenade you should be using. So you have 3 grenades as a Warlock that you can choose with the Void tree. You can use either Vortex Grenade, Axion Grenade, or Scatter Grenade. Now Vortex Grenade I think is your primary choice. It's going to do the highest damage out of the 3, and that's one of the priorities with this build, is big damage. So when you overcharge this grenade, the Vortex Grenade is going to do more damage and have a much bigger radius. It's almost as big actually as the Nova Bomb from the bottom tree Warlock. So that's what I recommend. Now, Axion Grenade is not a bad choice, because overcharging it gives the bolts that it sends out really, really aggressive tracking that will totally chase enemies that are even running away. It'll chase them around corners if they go try and hide. It actually gives really good tracking to the grenade, but that grenade is only really good for ad clear. It's not very good for single target damage. Now, Scatter Grenade technically has the potential to be good because it releases a lot of little grenades that blow up. And if you're trying to do single target damage, Scatter Grenade could be a good choice, except it's very inconsistent. Sometimes you'll throw the grenade out, and instead of splitting into the little pieces like it's supposed to that explode, it'll just bounce up and down. And that's kind of funny to watch, but it's not as funny when the enemies you were supposed to kill with those grenade come around the corner and obliterate you. So I do not recommend Scatter Grenade. So that's it for the grenades. And lastly, let's talk about what kind of stats you should be looking for. So this is a PvE build, so that makes recovery your most important stat. But I will say, as a longtime Warlock main, that one of the weaknesses of the class has always been vertical jump height. You know, Warlock jump is great for covering long distance, but if you're really trying to just jump straight up and reach a ledge or something, Warlock jump is not great for that. So actually having decent mobility is somewhat important. I would still prioritize recovery the highest, but I think the next most important stat to look for is mobility for a Warlock. And I don't find that resilience is particularly important in PvE for Warlocks. You have a lot of tools to be able to heal yourself, to get away from damage. If you're using Convoverse Hold, you have damage mitigation built into your charging your grenade. I don't think resilience is that useful for Warlocks in PvE. Now for the other three stats, discipline is going to be by far the most important. Your focus is on throwing as many grenades as possible, and having a short regen timer on your grenade is going to be absolutely the most important thing. Intellect is not really necessary because if you're using enhanced ashes to assets and you're throwing your grenades properly, you're going to be generating super fast anyways, so you don't need a lot of intellect. And strength has never been very important for this build. You're not really looking to melee that often. So that's it for the build. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. If you've made it this far into the guide, thank you. And as always, feedback and suggestions are much appreciated. I hope you guys check out some of the other options. I know if you're using Nezarec Sin already, try out Convoverse Hold, try out Verities Brow. You might be surprised, you might like it. And that's it for this build. Thanks for checking out the video. Leaving a like and subscribe is always appreciated, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.